SNP spokesperson Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we stand for election, every one of us appeals to the electorate to get out and vote. We impress on them how important it is that they use their democratic right to express their will through the ballot box. We want bigger turnouts and we seek more and better engagement. And yet voter ID will have a detrimental effect on turnouts. And we know this because we can measure it. On a number of occasions, the UK Government has tried to justify voter identification cards by stating that they already exist. They exist within the UK and they exist as they are used in Northern Ireland. What they can't say with any conviction is that they have been a success in Northern Ireland. In fact, the turnout in the first election in Northern Ireland after photographic ID was introduced was 2.3% down. If we extrapolate this data and apply it to a UK general election, approximately 1.1 million people would not vote. And this would not fall evenly across the population. So who is it that we're disenfranchising? Angela Kitching, Head of Affairs at Age UK, points out that the government's own research found that 6% of people of 70 years of age would have problems presenting the right kind of ID. And it's reasonable to believe that estimate is low, as the UK government did not include the 500,000 people in care homes and sheltered accommodation in their research. It's no surprise that Angela Kitching describes the idea as being for the fairies. The Royal National Institute for the Blind said this will disproportionately disenfranchise blind and partially sighted people, particularly older blind. The Royal MENCAP Society have raised concerns that voter ID could simply result in yet another barrier to people with a learning disability participating in elections. Sense, the national charity that supports people with complex disabilities, has also raised concerns in, given the barriers that already face disabled people while voting, Sense is concerned that this could make it harder for some disabled people to vote. Concerns have been raised by representing LGBTQ+ communities, including the LGBT Town Foundation, Mermaid and Stonewall. The Runnymede Trust has raised concerns that introducing a voter ID requirement would further barriers to voting for black and ethnic minority groups. These groups should not be disadvantaged. Their votes and their views are not worth less. And pilot tests have shown that 30% of people who had their ballot paper refused because of a lack of an ID did not return later with an ID to vote. Were all these people trying to impersonate someone? I don't think so. And as mentioned earlier, the measurements are also disproportionately impacted by younger voters with ID cards such as Oyster 60+ card being valid, but an Oyster 18 card not being valid. Despite calls for IDs for rail cars and student IDs to be accepted, the government have refused this. And of course, change attracts a financial cost. Disappointingly, the UK government does not know how much this change will cost. The assessment is £150 million based on an assumed take-up of 2%. But a survey carried out by the UK government found that 31% of people said they would apply for a voter ID card. The impact assessment estimated an additional £10.2 million should be added for each additional percentage point, which brings the cost of 31% to £450 million. But in truth, we don't know, because the surveyed were not informed of the existing photographic ID that would be acceptable, or indeed that out-of-date photographic ID would be acceptable. And there's more confusion which we are supposed to legislate. We need a clearer explanation as to how a period of validity would work for a voter card if an expiry date is not a bar to it being used for its sole purpose at a polling station. And what is it that's driving this change? Photographic voter ID is supposed to be required to address the issue of personation, the occasions when somebody pretends to be another elector and votes on their behalf. We're asking people that work for a very long day in polling places to visually verify that each voter looks at the photo they present. And if they're not happy with it, then they need to refuse that person the right to vote. This is a burden that will weigh heavily on many of those that up until now have diligently staffed polling places. Therefore, to go to such lengths as introducing photographic voter ID place this burden on electoral staff and risk disenfranchising 1.1 million voters, this must be a massive problem. And as was touched upon earlier on, the right honourable member for Ashton-under-Lyne, there were over 58 million votes cast in elections in 2019. There were 33 counts of personation at a polling station. This comprises, as you heard, 0.00057%, and when causation is made for the number of people cautioned or convicted of personation, the percentage is reduced to 0.0000035% of votes cast. This is a sledgehammer looking for a nut to crack. It's a solution looking for a problem. Madam Deputy Speaker, the long and short of it is that this is legislation that has been pushed through with little substantial evidence of its value. And finally, as long as Scotland remains part of this UK and Westminster has the power to effect the voting franchise and the electoral process in Scotland, even as regarding elections to this place, we in the SNP will hold it to account and will demand that any changes are transparent, considered, constructive and inclusive. This motion does not satisfy that criteria.